Okay, we are back. This is going to be the part 2 lecture for chapter 2, documenting the crime scene, um, talking about note-taking, photography, and sketching. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we're going to talk now a little bit about investigative photography. So a picture is indeed worth 1,000 words, and investigative photographs and videos are essential to proper crime scene documentation. Now, the basic purpose of crime scene photography is to record the scene permanently or in its permanent state at a certain time. And photographs and video recordings basically reproduce the crime scene in detail for presentation to the prosecution, to the defense, witnesses, the judge, and of course the jury, which is the trier of fact. And a lot of times photographs, video, mock-ups, etc., these are things that help the jury add context to sometimes complex investigations, because they can't really visit the crime scene, but these mock-ups or these photos or the video helps them picture how something may or may not have occurred. So it's important to really understand that. Now the time that elapses between the commission of a crime and when a suspect in that crime is brought to trial can sometimes stretch into months and even years, actually. And with the condition of the crime scene and physical evidence deteriorating along that way, photographs and videos can then preserve that scene, making it exactly the way it was when the incident actually took place. Does that kind of make sense? And it also lends for us to remember as investigators not to touch or move any evidence until all of the photographs or videos have been taken of the general area and all of the evidence, because we don't want to have photos that look different. In one picture there's this object, and in one picture there's not. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Now, also keep in mind that although investigators take most crime scene photographs, and a lot of times it's not just the detectives, it's a forensic crime scene specialist or technician, other photos can also be obtained from, let's say, commercial or amateur photographers that may have been in the area, attorneys, sometimes the news media, or even the coroner staff. And remember that, or consider that, with today's technology and the prevalence of smartphones and how great some of these phones, how the pictures are so cool and clear, a large percentage of the general population has access to a camera and a video recorder at almost all the time. So, for example, in an arson case at a church, photographs came from multiple outside sources. Now, the pastor in this case hired a photographer to take pictures for historical purposes and to assess damage. An insurance company photographer took pictures. A television news crew had taken live in progress footage, and numerous bystanders with cell phones watched and recorded as the firefighters attempted to put out the fire. And these pictures, along with those taken by police personnel, provided an excellent record of the fire in progress, its point of origin, and the resulting damage. So, along with that, keep in mind that video is now well established as an investigative tool, not just photographs. Lightweight handheld video recorders are very easy to use at a crime scene and provide high quality digital format of crime scene images. So not just video, some video cameras take still shots as well. And video can also be taken of witness testimony, depositions, evidence lineups, and of course, even trials. So, these are some of the upsides and some of the rationales behind the advantages. But what are some of the direct advantages and disadvantage? Well, one advantage of photographs is that they can be taken immediately. An important factor in, let's say, bad weather or when there's a lot of people present. So, for example, a picture of a footprint in the dirt outside of a window that was broken during a burglary can be very important. Especially if it rains before the investigators can, let's say, take a casting of that footprint. And the same is true when the large number of people present might actually alter the crime scene. So photographs, again, they accurately represent the crime scene. So those are some benefits. Benefits of digital photography are numerous. The images are quickly adaptable as email attachments, and most digital cameras record the technical information about each photograph, like the date, the time, the camera settings, in a text file associated with the image. And the issue of the image degradation, a common problem with film, is avoided, and even the physical space required to file and storage a lot of different photographs is reduced because you're using digital photography. So although photographs of a crime scene accurately represent what was present, they include everything at the scene. So when we start to kind of think what might be some of the disadvantages, and that includes relevant items and also irrelevant items. So much detail in these photos might distract viewers, or when they're looking at the photograph, from what they're actually supposed to be looking at. So we have to kind of consider that as a possibility. Now, it is important that investigators keep up with technology to ensure that the equipment that they are using can capture discrete evidence, such as fingerprint outlines, etc. Again, disadvantages might be the detail in the photos might take away or distract from viewers. But little small nuisance items, or even discrete evidence might be missed. So if you take these big pictures, you might miss some of the little things. So again, advantages, disadvantage. What about video then? Well, some advantages of video is it can show distance a lot of times, which is kind of interesting. So and it also has audio capability. In addition, it can do a slow, say, pan or panoramic view of a crime scene. Even though you're going to take individual pictures, you could actually pan a crime scene. So some of the disadvantages as it relates to video could be the inability to focus, maybe overusing the zoom a little bit. But the big one is the unintentional audio. Because there's audio with these video cameras, whatever you say is going to be picked up and subsequently could be heard in a court of law. So you have to remember the unintentional audio. Now, another advantage that is important to kind of remember before we move on would be that as you walk through a crime scene, you can actually narrate. You can narrate your video. So I'm walking in the front door, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that. So you can narrate, but there is going to be the possibility of unintentional audio. And as part of the CSI effect, juries now expect to see video of a crime scene. Now, regrettably, some agencies, whether because of lack of funding or their prioritization, they fail to provide accurate, or adequate training of those tasked with videotaping a crime scene. Basically assuming that if officers are able to tape their cousin's wedding or their daughter's soccer game, then it should be good enough for them to handle a camcorder at a crime scene. But that's not always the case. So the negative consequence, again, the big one, can be the poor video quality. And there are a lot of common mistakes. Again, focusing, overusing of the zoom, and then finally, again, keep in mind that unintended audio. And here's kind of a new thing, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but what about video from an officer's body-worn camera? That can, and a lot of times is used as evidence and included as part of the report. So you do have that. But what comes along with body-worn video? A lot of times, the audio that comes with it. So we have to kind of, we have to understand there's going to be the audio that comes with the video. And as I said before, a lot of times these crime scenes are photographed and videotaped by specialists. So there are specific units, and depending upon, what agency you're from, they call them different things. But typically it's a crime scene unit, and they have crime scene or evidence technicians that will come out and not only help you locate the evidence, but help you photograph it and videotape it and tag it and bag it and process it, etc. And this is great when you have these people that are trained to come and do that. Now, investigators do receive a level of training, but nowhere near those that are trained in crime scene reconstruction, etc. Okay, so what would be some of the basic camera equipment? And again, this is just basic, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. But some of the basic equipment would include things like an Instaprint camera. And if you don't know what that is, it's a low-cost per-image type instant print photography camera. And they're digital, so they're not like the old Polaroids. That's the word I was kind of thinking of, where you get, that kind of old Polaroid. So if you're old, you recognize that noise. If you're not old, then you don't. But Polaroid cameras, the film was expensive. You only got like 10 photos in a pack for like, $15 or whatever. And the photos were horrible. But now you have the ability to do Instaprint with digital photography, and it provides an immediate photo. So, I mean, these are, again, some things that would be great to have. Something called a point-and-shoot camera. These have fixed lenses, and they're relatively expensive, and they're super easy to use because these cameras automatically adjust things like the shutter speed and the aperture control, if you don't know about cameras, and other settings, lessening the likelihood of a poor image quality resulting from operator error, because the cops a lot of times aren't properly trained. And sometimes some models are pretty rugged, and they're water resistant, maybe not waterproof, and shock resistant. Maybe not shock proof because law enforcement officers can be a little rough on their equipment. So that's the point and shoot. Next would be a digital single lens camera. And these are significant. These are cameras that have a significantly higher image quality and even resolution than those other point to shoots. And the benefit here is that with certain accessories, these cameras can be adapted to take better photos in challenging situations. So adding a zoom or a telephoto lens can capture details from far away. if it's not possible to physically reach the location right away. Then they have fingerprint cameras, and these are specially constructed to take pictures of fingerprints without distortion, and they provide their own light through several bulbs that are built into the camera. So it's actually kind of a cool thing. And then, of course, video cameras. And these have commonly been used to record, you know, undercover crimes like narcotics dealing and other types of surveillance. A lot of times, permanently installed units are used, and they frequently photograph crimes that are actually being committed, like a bank robbery or shoplifting. So stores typically have these. Liquor stores, gas stations, even big business, even commercial buildings will have these different types of cameras. So again, these are all some of the things that we should consider and some of the basic information. And then we have a lot of different accessories, and it depends on the camera and really what you're trained in. And it could be things like lighting or high intensity spotlights or different types of lighting to be able to illuminate a crime scene as officers look for smaller pieces of evidence. Sometimes there are special lenses and filters that are available for different purposes. Various filters can eliminate certain colors from a photograph. I mean, you have all of this different stuff. You even have the ability to use special light source options that are like black lights that will pick up body fluids and even blood when certain chemicals are sprayed. So again, these are other items that have to do with not just photographic equipment, but lighting accessories. So there's a lot of different things that are out there. So with that said, what is it that you're supposed to photograph or videotape? Because there's a lot of different thought processes on this. So the Handbook of Forensic Evidence from the FBI recommends photographing the crime scene as soon as possible. And that kind of makes sense because there are fragile areas of the crime scene, and you want to photograph those first. And you want to take sufficient photographs or video to be able to capture or reconstruct the entire scene. And this then will usually require a series of shots or video, notably of the entrance point, the area where the commission of the crime occurred, and then let's say the exit point. And if possible, show the entire crime scene in a picture sequence. This helps relate the crime to, let's say, other crimes. So, plan your shots and do this in a fashion that least disturbs the crime scene. So that's one thing that you need to kind of consider. Use overlapping to cover the entire crime scene. And overlapping, again, is where you move the camera to cover the entire crime scene area, but plan a sequence of shots. And again, the initial photograph shows the entire crime scene. And then you kind of photograph it in stages. So you photograph the scene, let's say clockwise, and take the first picture with a specific object on the right. And for the second photo, make sure that that same object is on the left side of the photograph. And then you go around. Does that kind of make sense? And you continue in that way until you've covered the entire scene. That's called overlapping. And this progression of shots that you're going to do, again, if you do it properly, it's going to reconstruct the commission of the crime. So the recommendation is that you do three things. You do long-range shots of the location, the points of ingress, meaning how they got in, and egress, how people get out. Establish the location, where it's at, the buildings, the cars, etc. And then do medium range shots. And this is of the immediate crime scene and the location of objects of evidence within the area or the room. And then finally, you finish up with close range shots of specific evidence, such as hairs or fibers or footprints or bloodstains. The entire surface of some objects may be photographed to show all of the evidence. For example, a table surface may have bloodstains, fingerprints, hairs, and fibers. But it's especially important to take close range photographs of objects that will be collected or taken for preservation of evidence. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. And if you do it in that sequence, you can recreate things. Now, what are the errors? Things to avoid? Well, to obtain effective photographs and video, be familiar with the equipment that you have and check it before you use it. You know, unfamiliarity, meaning like I don't know what I'm doing here, and lack of practice with this type of equipment is going to increase your chance of error. And keep in mind that in your crime scene, if something's been moved, don't put it back, because it's virtually impossible to return an object to its original position. The item should actually be still photographed, and it should be noted that it is not believed to be in its original location, and you can explain that in your report. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Show the objects in their relative size and position, and you may, again, that's from getting close-up photos, and you may need to actually put a little ruler in there. So, or take pictures from eye level, the height from which people normally observe objects. Make sure true north is known. Okay, so people know direction, and notated on at least one reference image to facilitate orientation. Do not video record or photograph members of the crime scene team. Take photos before these individuals start their work. And then finally, when videotaping a crime scene, be sure to verbalize clearly and to introduce clearly what is being shown. And sometimes having a checklist to do this is going to help. It helps eliminating errors. So here's a couple of photographs, and yes, they're disgusting, but these are crime scene photos. And remember, we talked about stuff that doesn't need to be in the picture that draws people's attention. So, the photo on the right especially, and typically nowadays we don't cover up bodies anymore. We put little kind of barriers around them because we don't want to transfer or contaminate the investigative scene. And we'll learn more about that as we deal with forensics. But just to kind of give you an example. All right, so what are some types then of investigative photography? So in addition to crime scene photography, certain other types of photography do play vital roles. And one is, surveillance photography. And this is where you record a suspect or a subject's criminal behavior or their actions without them knowing it. And, part of the issue with that is, learning how to do surveillance, but also being able to conceal a camera, especially if that surveillance is close, or even if you're working in an undercover assignment. So you might use a bag, a briefcase, a suitcase, a coat pocket with an opening. You can also conceal a camera by putting it on a rooftop or near windows of a building or in vehicles. You just have to kind of understand that, depending upon whatever type of surveillance is, that you're going to need the right equipment to do that. And surveillance photography actually has a nickname. It's called trap photography, because the photos prove that an incident occurred and can later help identify this suspect and weapons, etc. And these photos also corroborate witness testimony and identification. So the fact that the photo exists often induces guilty pleas without court appearances, thus saving a lot of time because there's a picture of this person doing something they shouldn't have been doing, if that makes sense. We also have aerial photography. And it would look like something like this. And investigators often use aerial photography to cover extensive areas. So for example, it can be used following a bank robbery to show roads leading to and from the bank. It's also useful when police officers know that a crime is going to be committed, but not when. And aerial photography shows routes to the scene, as well as how to block escape routes, avoid detours, and things like that. And this is a picture of the Inland Regional Center aerial photography on the day of the terrorist incident. And it kind of helps, it's an aerial view that will show the judge and the jury, etc., on maybe where the crime scene was or where this building was, where the shootings occurred in comparison to everything else. So it is very important. Some other types of photography include laboratory photography. So not all investigative photography is done in the field. Sometimes objects are transported to the lab and they're photoed in a lab with some special equipment. Because some things are extremely large, or they're, and you can't really take the equipment out to the field. The equipment is actually large or delicate or expensive. So they bring this evidence to the lab. The first one is what we call microphotography, and this would be pictures through a microscope. We have macro photography. This enlarges stuff like a fingerprint. We have laser beam photography. This can reveal evidence that's indiscernible to the naked eye, meaning that you can't see it with your naked eye. So it might be something like the outline of a footprint on a rug or in carpet. But you really couldn't see it, if that kind of makes sense. Other examples, if I go back to like the macro photography, it could be a fingerprint, as I said, or it could be a tool mark to make it bigger so you can see the details of the ridges or the tool that was used. And the micro photography is, it's going to photograph smaller, minute particles, things like hairs or fibers. And then we have the ultraviolet light photography, and these are visible impressions of, let's say, bruises and injuries long after they've occurred. And this uses the low end of the color spectrum, which is basically invisible to human sight, to make visible impressions. And again, things like bruises or injuries after they've occurred for a while. Bite marks, injuries caused by cigarette burns or strangulation marks, all of those types of things. So, and there's other types of photography. We've talked about it, and we'll talk about it more in some other chapters, like mugshots. These are types of photography. And although investigators seldom take mugshots themselves, these photographs, usually called booking photos, are very significant in criminal investigations because law enforcement will put together lineups, what we call six-packs of individuals that look similar, to have witnesses or victims identify them. Sometimes we even do live lineups. And here's an example of a photographic lineup called a six-pack. So that's just something else for us to consider as it relates to photographs. Well, how do we, now that we kind of know how to do it, let's talk a little bit about filing and maintaining the security of photographic evidence. So photographs must be properly identified, filed, and kept secure to be admissible as evidence. In the field notes, the photographs taken should be dated and numbered in sequence. And this includes the case number, the type of offense, the subject of the picture, and to further identify the photograph with the crime scene and the subject, record of the photographer's name, location, and direction of the camera, the lens type maybe, and even the distance might be appropriate to put on there. But again, you're going to want to include this identifying information. And you want to file the images for easy reference. So pictures in the case file are available to others. Therefore, it is usually best to put them in a special photographic file cross-referenced by case number. Now, for digital items, file them appropriately as evidence or within your department's internal secured hard drive. And sometimes policy is going to dictate that. And then finally, maintaining security. Well, of course, record the chain of custody of the photographs in the field notes or in a special file. Mark and identify the memory media as it is removed from the camera. And each time the media changes possession, you need to record the name of a person accepting it. And this is called the chain of custody. And we'll learn a little bit more about that in other chapters. So what about the admissibility then of photographs? So they must meet a specific criteria in order to be admissible in court. And rules of evidence dictate that photographs must be material, relevant, competent, accurate, and free of distortion in order to be admissible. So a material photograph relates to a specific case and subject. So material evidence is relevant and forms a substantive part of the case presented or has a legitimate and effective influence on the decision of a case. A relevant photograph helps explain testimony. A competent photograph accurately represents what it purports to represent. And of course, again, they need to be properly identified and properly placed in the chain of custody, etc. So the phrase, photos do not lie. What do you think? Yes? No? Can they be altered? Are there issues with photographs, especially with digital photographs? Just something for you to kind of chew on. Okay, now we're going to finish up talking about sketches. So, in addition to admissible photographs and videotapes, and after such images have been taken, investigators are usually going to prepare a crime scene sketch. And usually we do this for serious crimes or crash scenes. Now, an investigator's sketch can be more descriptive than several hundred words. And I have a link to what we call Faro software. And I'm going to talk about software in a couple of minutes. But just know that the crime scene sketch is going to show you a lot of information. So here's an example of a crime scene sketch done using software. Okay, so this would be Faro software. This is Crime Zone, and it recreates a crime scene. And you can do this in 2D and 3D, and you can incorporate it, the bullet trajectory. You can use this at crash scenes. You can show body location, other evidence, blood spatter, bullet trajectory, vertical surfaces, you name it. So here, again, these are some software examples. So here are some of the important aspects of a crime scene sketch. Well, first, it does accurately portray the physical facts. It does relate to the sequence of events. It establishes the precise location and relationship of objects and evidence at the scene. It helps create a mental picture of the scene. It is a permanent record of the scene, and it is usually admissible in court. Now, again, when we back up and we look at this one, these are mock-ups, but these are, a lot of times these are done for, the jury's benefit, to be able to see how things actually looked at the time. And some of these scenes can actually be animated. So again, it's really, really cool. So what is it that you sketch? Well, really quick. A crime scene sketch, again, assists in interviewing and interrogating people, preparing the investigative report, and presenting the case in court. Now, the sketch supplements those photographs that you took, the notes, the plaster casts, and other investigative techniques. Now, artistic ability is helpful, but it's not essential in making a crime scene sketch. Still, many officers kind of avoid making sketches because they say they can't draw. Now, to overcome this, you need to practice maybe sketching, maybe your house or familiar scenes, the police station. Use graph paper to kind of get your confidence. The most common types of sketches are those drawn at the scene, and they're called rough sketches. And those are basically completed by an investigator, or maybe someone that's just going to do the crime scene sketch, but typically it's the investigator. So when you talk about the rough sketch, this is the first, let's say, pencil drawing outline of a scene and the location of objects and evidence. And of course, again, remember, it's better to put in too much rather than too little. And you don't have to include irrelevant objects if you know that they're irrelevant. And the area to be sketched depends on the crime scene, the large area or small area. And original floor plans are sometimes helpful when you sketch. The materials that you're going to need are going to be, again, this is a first pencil drawn outline of the scene, so any type of paper will do at this time. Keep a couple of pencils on hand. Use a measuring tape for measuring the walls, the long distances, or from one point to another. And use a compass or your cell phone that has a compass app to determine true north if you don't know what that is. Now, on the left is going to be the rough sketch, and on the right is going to be a more cleaned up version of a final sketch. And again, remember, there are software programs that do this for you as well. But I just kind of wanted to show you an example. Here's another example. If you look on the left, that's kind of the rough sketch that the person did at the scene. And I know you're laughing at it, but then on the one on the right, the person used a ruler and made measurements. And you'll learn more about measurements in your textbook, but you have points of measure. And each one of these is, there's a, going to be a kind of a map to tell you what is what in there. That's actually turned out pretty cool. So to sketch a scene, again, once photographs have been taken and other priority steps in the preliminary investigation are done, you can start to sketch your scene. And first, make an overall judgment of the scene. Remember, don't move, remove, or touch anything or pick it up until it's been photographed, located on the rough sketch, and described in detail on your notes. So make sure you've got all that down. And to sketch a scene, here's some steps. And I'm not going to go through each one of these. I'll let you read them in your textbook, but observe and plan. So before you start, observe the scene and plan how you're going to do this. 2, measure the distances. And that's going to be important. So all measurements must be accurate. Don't estimate stuff. About 2 feet. Measure it. Because that's going to be important later. Plot different objects. Plotting methods are used to locate objects and evidence on the sketch. And again, I'm not going to go through each one of these individually. There's a lot of information in your textbook. Make sure you take notes as well. That's an important thing as you do a sketch. So after you've completed your sketch, take careful notes regarding all the relevant factors associated with the scene that are not sketchable, like lighting. You can't sketch that, or weather, or colors, or people that are present, etc. Excuse me. Use a legend and a scale. So prepare a legend so people know what is what and what the scale is. And then finally, reassess the sketch. So before you leave, take another look and make sure that you've recorded everything that you need to record on that particular sketch. When you file the sketch, make sure you place the rough sketch in a secure file. It is a permanent record for all future investigations of that crime, and it may be used later to question witnesses or suspects, and is the foundation for the finished scale drawing. So it's important that you keep that. The finished scale drawing, given a well drawn out rough sketch, the finished scale drawing can then be completed. You can do this in pencil, but a lot of times they suggest you do it in ink. You're going to want to draw it to scale. Some of the materials that you might need might be, again, different colored pens, it can be simple or it can be complex. It's kind of up to you. And you can do this at the police station. And here's kind of an example of one. All right, so we talked a little bit about computer-aided or assisted drawing, calling it CAD. And there are a lot of benefits to CAD. As evidenced throughout this entire discussion, computer technology has enhanced many of the processes and procedures in crime scene investigation and documentation. The benefits of CAD would be accuracy. That would be one of them. Repeatability, simplicity, the speed to which you can get it done. And then, or portability. So, and again, some of these can be animated. So you can actually show a 3D animated mock-up to the jury of how this crime occurred. But if you look at some of the pictures, you can show the jury the trajectory of bullet holes and where evidence was located, where the body was. And here's kind of another example here. The same with, let's say, fatal traffic collisions. You can do the same thing where you can create this really cool final sketch or draft, and you can do a 3D mock-up and actually have the vehicles move. So it's really kind of cool, and you can show this in court. Now, last thing is talking quickly about admissibility. So the investigator, with all this, other evidence, the investigator must be prepared to testify about the information contained in all of the sketches, the conditions under which the drawings, the sketches were made, and the process that was used to construct it or make it. Finishing up or just kind of ending this discussion, remember, well-prepared sketches and drawings, they do help the judges, the juries, the witnesses, and other people visualize these scenes. So that's really the benefit to all of this. So a lot of information we covered. So in summary, remember, investigative notes and reports, they are critical parts of an investigation. Be sure to record all relevant information concerning a crime. Photography, including video photography, has become increasingly important in criminal investigation. We know that videos are now they're well established as that investigative tool. And in addition to photographs, don't forget that crime scene sketches are often used as well. Okay, so this is going to conclude part 2 of our Chapter 2 lecture. Until next time.